I'm going to tell this as a dramatized monologue in my own voice, because the story people think they know is usually a headline, not the process. And when I walked into the world of social platforms and crypto, I didn't see villains and heroes. I saw systems that had grown fragile and opaque, algorithms treated like state secrets, incentives misaligned, and a lot of very smart people optimizing for engagement without asking what kind of engagement actually strengthens civilization. So, when people say reach is throttled, I understand why it feels that way. Because when you change a system that's been tuned for years to reward outrage, dopamine spikes, and tribal reinforcement, any attempt to rebalance it will feel like someone turned down the volume. And I knew that going in, I knew the moment you remove hidden levers, shadow rankings, and backroom moderation rules, people will experience the loss of artificial amplification as censorship, even when the goal is the opposite, which is to make the playing field more honest, more visible, and less manipulable by bots, coordinated campaigns, or financial incentives that don't serve users. And crypto fits into this because it's fundamentally about decentralization of trust, about removing intermediaries that skim value while claiming to provide safety. And I've always been interested in systems that reduce friction while increasing resilience. Whether that's rockets that land themselves, electric cars that update like software, or financial rails that don't require permission from a handful of institutions. And when critics say I'm mixing crypto hype with platform control, I think they miss the point that the real experiment is transparency, open algorithms, community notes, and market-based signals instead of paternalistic gatekeeping. Because for years, platforms told users they were neutral while quietly shaping discourse through knobs nobody could see, and that eroded trust far more than any explicit change ever could. So yes, the algorithm changed. It had to, because an algorithm optimized solely for time spent will eventually optimize for anger, fear, and division. And when you dial that back, you'll hear complaints from people who built their entire strategy on exploiting those dynamics, and they'll say their reach is dead when in reality the free boost they were getting is gone. And that's uncomfortable but necessary. And from the inside, what I saw was not a clean machine, but a patchwork of legacy code, policy exceptions, and incentives that rewarded conformity over curiosity. So the choice was either preserve a comfortable illusion or rip the bandage off and accept short-term chaos for long-term health. And I've never been particularly good at choosing comfort over progress. And with crypto, the same philosophy applies because markets are brutally honest in the long run. They punish nonsense and reward utility. And social platforms should work the same way, where value emerges from genuine interaction rather than artificially inflated reach. And I know people feel throttled because they compare today's numbers to yesterday's highs without accounting for the fact that yesterday's highs were often synthetic, propped up by systems that favored certain formats, certain emotions, certain political alignments. And when you flatten that curve, reality feels like suppression. And I don't dismiss those feelings, but I also don't believe the answer is to quietly restore manipulation just to keep everyone happy, because that's how you end up with a system that no longer serves truth or innovation. And if you look at my track record, you'll see a pattern of breaking things that are already broken but pretending not to be. Whether it's the auto industry, space launch, economics, or now digital town squares. And I accept that doing this in public invites criticism, memes, and conspiracy theories. But I'd rather have loud disagreement in the open than silent control behind closed doors. And if the algorithm now favors replies over virality, context over outrage, and humans over bots, that's not throttling, that's recalibration. And crypto conversations get caught in this because speculation is loud and utility is quiet. And when you turn down the noise, the silence feels like punishment. But silence is often where real building happens, and I don't expect everyone to agree with the direction. I never have. But I do expect the system to be explainable, challengeable, and ultimately correctable by the people who use it, not by a priesthood of engineers or moderators deciding what society should see. And if that means enduring a period where everyone argues about reach, throttling, and intent, that's fine, because arguments mean people still care, and apathy is the real death of a platform. And from my perspective, this is not about controlling speech or pumping assets. It's about aligning incentives so that over time, the loudest voices aren't the most extreme, but the most interesting, the most useful, and the most grounded in reality. And that's a long game. And I've always played long games, even when the short term looks messy. And the second part of the story is where things get even more misunderstood. Because once you change the mechanics, people start inventing motives, and suddenly every dip in impressions becomes proof of a grand conspiracy. But from where I'm sitting, the reality is far more mechanical and far less dramatic, because systems respond to incentives whether you like it or not. And for a long time, the incentive structure rewarded saying the same thing louder, angrier, and faster, which is great for short-term growth metrics and terrible for long-term signal. And when you step in and say, we're going to favor originality, replies that add information, time spent reading instead of scrolling, and verified humans over anonymous bot swarms, you effectively tell a huge portion of the ecosystem that the game they mastered no longer exists. And people who lose an advantage rarely say, the advantage was unfair. They say the referee is biased, and I've seen this play out in every industry I've touched, from legacy automakers claiming electric cars were scammed to space incumbents insisting reusable rockets were impossible. And now it's creators and commentators saying, reach has been stolen, when what's really happened is that the artificial tailwind is gone. And crypto ties into this because speculation thrives on amplification, on viral loops, on narratives that move faster than facts. And when you slow the loop, you don't kill innovation, you kill hype velocity. And those two things get conflated constantly. And I'm not anti-crypto, I'm anti-fraud, anti-smoke, anti-systems that reward whoever can yell moon the loudest. And when people say the platform is hostile to crypto, what they often mean is that it's less hospitable to empty promises, and that's a painful adjustment if your identity or income was built on that noise. And then there's the accusation that I personally tweak the algorithm based on my opinions, which gives me more credit for micromanagement than I deserve, because the real focus has been on making the rules simpler and more visible, not secretly steering outcomes. And that's the irony. The more you reduce hidden control, the more people assume it must still be there because they've been trained by years of invisible moderation to expect manipulation and rebuilding trust in a digital public square is harder than building rockets because at least rockets don't accuse you of shadow banning them when gravity works as expected. And I've said before that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that applies here because when ranking systems are published, community notes are open, and policy enforcement is explainable, the narrative shifts from what are they hiding to why don't I like what the system is showing me? And that's a much healthier debate even if it's louder. And yes, some accounts will grow slower, some will shrink, and some will discover that their audience was never as real as the numbers suggested, and that's not punishment. That's correction, and corrections always feel unfair to those who benefited from the imbalance. And the long-term vision here isn't to make everyone happy. It's to make the platform anti-fragile, where bad actors can't game it indefinitely, where bots don't drown out humans, and where financial incentives align with actual contribution instead of pure virality. And crypto conversations that provide real education, real tools, real code, and real use cases will survive that environment just fine, while pure hype cycles will burn out faster. And that's not throttling, that's evolution. And I understand that telling this story in the middle of the transition is frustrating because people want immediate clarity, immediate reassurance, immediate growth. But meaningful systems don't stabilize overnight. And if you zoom out far enough, you'll see that this phase, as chaotic and controversial as it feels, is the necessary turbulence before a more honest equilibrium. And I've never been particularly afraid of turbulence because it usually means you're actually moving somewhere instead of